change. Everything you're going to do in an organization soon is going to have some element of change in it that you're going to be focused on. So whether it's adapting to artificial intelligence, it's a reorganization, it's you went through a layoff or reduction in force, a RIF, or you're about to go through one, you've got a new position you're moving into, you're helping somebody else move into, you've got a new business model, you just did a merger or an acquisition, or you're about to do one, or you're post-merger. And we pay attention to that and we miss the bigger thing, which is a riptide of societal, cultural, and technological change. This isn't political, but a lot of this stuff has been politicized. And it's distracting people, and it's dividing people, and it's driving down the performance of your organization. So what I think we need to do is figure out how to reduce the distraction, reduce the division, and get people to focus. We have a loneliness epidemic in this country, and I think it's very much tied to how we're divided and distracted. And so I want to look at a few factors that have been driving this for decades. First and foremost, we'll start with church membership. In this country, a lot of people define themselves as being Christian or Judeo-Christian Americans. And until recently, like 3/4 of us, or relatively recently, belonged to some sort of church that was part of our identity, whether we went all the time. Now we're below 50% of the population belonging or identifying with being a part of a church or a religion. PTAs. When you went to school, there was a PTA, or Parent-Teacher Association, Parent-Teacher Organization. Now it's down to like 20%. Single households, 13% in 1960, 29% today. Single parents, 9% in 1950, 23% today. Across every demographic, we're spending more and more time alone, and we're not interacting with each other. We're not interacting with our neighbors. We're only interacting with people who are in our little bubbles. And I don't care how any of you voted. I guarantee you if we went out there and had a glass of wine, a beer, a cup of coffee, whatever, and sat and talked about what we cared about, we will have so much more in common than we have in difference. It's simply profitable to divide us. Back on the loneliness front, there's been a lot of research on this. Surgeon General's declared it an epidemic. Cigna Insurance has been researching it for about a decade. Right now, about 58% of adults report being lonely. Gen Z population, it can be as high as 80%. It's higher in younger populations. It's higher in folks who are lower income. It's higher in racial minorities. Why does this matter? It matters a lot because loneliness is a threat. We leapt to the top of the food chain because we could communicate and collaborate. It wasn't survival of the fittest, it was survival of the friendliness. It was our ability to work together that allows us to thrive and thrive. And that's what drives the performance in your organizations. So if we're lonely, our amygdala goes into overdrive. Our sympathetic nervous system goes out of whack. We start viewing everybody as, are you with me or against me? Us versus them, fight or flight. Did you vote for my candidate or not? I mean, it's that divisive, and it's distracting, and it's only going to get worse going into the fall. So I want to stop for a second and look at similarities that happen about every century. Stuff that happened in the 1920s, stuff that's happening now. And history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So in the 1920s, we had the 1918 flu, sometimes called the Spanish flu. We had COVID-19 here. These will be viewed probably by historians as plagues. Plagues reorder society. And they're existential crises that cause us to question things. And I think that's been a big question around where does work fit in our lives? The technology that disrupted the 1920s was electricity. It was the industrial era. It changed everything in the home when we suddenly had vacuum cleaners and washing machines and dishwashers. Now we're going into the augmented era, and we're just starting to feel the impact of AI pervasively slipping into everything we do. The labor disruption in the 1920s was physical with the manufacturing lines, and now it's going to be cognitive, and we're just beginning to feel that. The work hours in the 1920s became 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. Unions, yes, had a big hand in that, but it started with Henry Ford. And not because he was a good guy, he really wasn't. But he noticed that all the accidents happened on the 9th, 10th, and 11th hour of the production line. So he kept the workday at 8 hours because it optimized physical performance. Now we're trying to look at how do we optimize physical and cognitive performance. 4-day work weeks, hybrid work. We're going to see more and more experiments around that. Gender role. In the 1920s, we had the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. So women went from being property to having some power to participating in progress. Now we've got changes around gender and sexuality. And if that stuff makes you uncomfortable, I get it. It's a very fast change on something very fundamental. You may say you don't believe in it. Okay. It's happening all over the world. Inequality. I mentioned the Raj Chetty research. Income inequality statistically was measured by this guy named Ginny, who came up with, this Italian statistician, who came up with this idea of a coefficient. And it basically means if I have 100 people and I have $100 and I give everybody $1, that's absolute equality. Good, bad, or indifferent. So your Gini coefficient is 0. If I give one person $100 and 99 people no money, that Gini coefficient is 1. That's absolute inequality. So the higher the number, the more unequal we are. We are now at the highest level we've been since the 1920s. Immigration. And it was a hot button issue. I'm just going to point out that in the 1920s, we had the highest percentage of folks who were not born in this country as a percentage of our population. We have that again now. The cultural response to these things in the 1920s, we had the rise of the KKK, we had the communist Red Scares, now we have domestic terrorism groups in the US and in other parts of the world. And then geopolitically, in the 1920s, we had the rise of fascism, which was a precursor to World War II. Now we have democracy versus autocracy. 4 billion people vote in 2024. That's about 40% of the globe. We've never had that many people vote at once. So it's eerie how these things are kind of rhyming, and when I look at them, the first and last things are like questions about our mortality that change how we think about things. These rapid changes, which are affecting all of our work, requires us to adapt, and adapt every single day. And then some of these changes that are societal and cultural, and I get them uncomfortable, but I think you have to talk about them or at least acknowledge that we're going through them, can cause fear, can cause resentment. So when you look back at that iceberg of change, your change is at the top. Your success in leading this change is going to be directly related to your ability to manage what's happening below the surface. And what's happening below the surface is velocity of change, is exhausting. Some people have fear of terrorism. Some people have just, am I going to be replaced by AI? I'm tired of learning new technologies. Evolving national identity. How am I an American if I'm surrounded by people who don't eat like me, look like me, pray like me, speak like me? Income inequality or opportunity. This is not my country if there isn't an opportunity for my kids to do better than I did. Societal and cultural change. Another pandemic, which seems possible because I think they may now be, instead of every 100 years, every 50 years. And then just general levels of uncertainty. Is economic uncertainty. We've been waiting for a recession now for 2 years. No economist seems to have gotten that right. How do you manage this? First, you listen. And it's not listening to everybody's opinion and integrating them. It's people haven't felt seen and heard. I think we got to this moment because we weren't seeing and hearing each other. Solidarity. Solidarity is simply saying, this is why we're here as a company. This is what we do. This is our North Star. This is what we care about. This is why you join the company. And with that, you build trust. You can't do anything without trust. With trust, you can do anything. So our change challenge is that every organization, no matter what you do, is always going through some sort of change. It used to be freeze, unfreeze, freeze, that change was a one-time thing. Change is continuous now. It's the norm. And we tend to think of that change in isolation. So it's, oh, we're adapting to AI, or we're doing a reorg, continuous, right? We're doing a layoff for a RIF, an unfortunate reality sometimes. We got a new position, we've got a new business model, we're doing an acquisition or a post-acquisition, and we think about that in its isolation. We communicate it in its isolation, and we act like everybody is just dealing with the change. In reality, below the surface, we have a riptide of societal, cultural, and technological change happening at the same time. The velocity and vectors of change are not being discussed by most people, but they're distracting individuals. And I think your ability to manage the change out of the water is directly related to your ability to understand what's happening below the surface. So what's happening below the surface? First, we're spending more and more time alone. So our community used to make up of a bunch of circles. So we had social gatherings with backyard barbecues, getting together along with people we didn't know. That's the difference between bonding capital, bonding social capital, spending time with people you do know. Bridging social capital is spending time with people you don't know. The erosion in bridging capital is what's leading to our decline in trust. Social gatherings, fewer. Religious affiliations, we're going through what they call a de-churching, fewer of those. And then clubs, whether it's Boys and Girls clubs, book clubs, we're having fewer and fewer clubs. And then you got work. And that collectively made our community. But what happened? A reduction in religious affiliations, a reduction in getting together with people we don't know, a reduction in clubs, and then work became everything for a lot of folks. I don't think this is right. I'm just acknowledging what happened. So when you're hearing from more and more folks, particularly younger folks, I want to have self-expression at work. I want to have belonging at work. I want to have community at work. I want to have purpose at work. They're looking for a lot of things that we used to have in other circles of our lives. And this didn't happen with the pandemic, and it didn't happen because of social media. These things have been underway my entire life, 50 plus years. And what has it done? It's left us lonely. We're in a friendship recession. We're in a loneliness crisis. This is the bummer part of the presentation. It gets up from here. But I think it's important to understand where we got here. So depending on which study you look at, the Cigna one or the Surgeon General one, in some populations, it's 50+% of people being regularly lonely. And what that does is your amygdala goes into overdrive, your parasympathetic nervous system goes into fight or flight mode. And you start seeing people, us versus them. It's equivalent to 15 cigarettes a day. It's bad for our physical health, it's bad to our mental health, it shortens our lives. It also erodes our ability to trust, particularly with people we don't know. So this is happening at the same time we're going through these once-a-century changes. So if you look at the 1920s and the 2020s side by side, history doesn't repeat itself, but it kind of rhymes. And what we came out of the Spanish flu or the 1918 flu with was the transition into the electrical era. And now we're going to the transition into the augmented era, or the AI era. And there's something about that plague, that pause, that allowed everything to accelerate. We're also seeing a shift from the labor disruption, which was physical in the 1920s, to being cognitive now. We've seen a change in work hours. So in the 1920s, the workday became 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And Henry Ford started this. Labor unions came in later, but Henry Ford started it, not because he was a great guy. Some evidence he wasn't always a great guy. He did a lot of amazing things. We have complicated characters in our past, and I think we need to wrestle with all of those issues. But he came in and capped the workday at 8 hours a day because he realized all the accidents were happening on the 9th, 10th, and 11th hour of the production line. Because physical labor breaks down at about 8 hours. We are trying to figure out now, with so many more of us doing cognitive labor as well as physical labor, when does cognitive labor break down? So we're seeing a rise in hybrid work, a lot of experiments around the 4-day work week. How do we optimize for that cognitive performance? In the 1920s, we had a change in the role of gender. Women began to work outside of the home. Women got the right to vote. And women became part of the workforce. Now we're seeing changes around gender and sexuality, particularly with the younger generations. It's not just happening in the US, it's actually happening on the global scale much faster than it's happening in the US when I look at the international data. Income inequality, the highest rate. If you were to draw a chart, in 1920s down, up 2020s in terms of our income inequality. Now the Gini coefficient, which is the number here, is a measure of income inequality. So if I have 100 people and I give each one of them $1, that's absolute equality. So the Gini coefficient would be 0. If I have 100 people and I give one person $100, that would be absolute inequality and the Gini coefficient is 1. So the higher the number, the more unequal we are. We're always going to be unequal on some scale. But the highest levels of income inequality are usually in countries that are economically stagnant. So that's why it's a bad sign for us. We're also seeing the highest level of people who were born outside the US as a percentage of our population as we did in the 1920s. Hasn't been this high since. And then geopolitically, we saw a rise of fascism between World War I and World War II, and now we're seeing democracy versus autocracy all around the world. So it's eerie how these shifts are happening, and a lot of it's reaction to change. So if we look at them collectively, first we start with an existential crisis. People start asking, is this really what I want to do with my life? So in the 1920s, it brought in the flapper movement, the bubonic plague brought in the Renaissance. We tend to shift what our lives mean. And I think the 2020s is bringing in this change around what work is in our lives, why we do it, how we think about it. Next up is an economic shift. We have to adapt to a new economic era. Then there's societal and cultural changes, and some of these make people very uncomfortable. I get it, particularly really rapid ones. But that is part of the thing we have to adapt to. And then the geopolitical shifts, I'm not sure where this is going to end, but we're seeing geopolitical and geostrategic shifts. Like if NATO goes away, what do we do? How do we orient as a global economy? So taking all those things, now look at the change. Now let's talk about what's happening below the surface. We've got the velocity of change. How many of you are exhausted from just trying to keep up and adapt? By a show of hands, right? There are fears of terrorism, particularly depending on where you are in the world. Some of those fears are very real. There's fears of technology and exhaustion of trying to keep up. Evolving national identity, that's a big part of what's sort of polarized us. Some people feel like, how am I an American if I'm surrounded by people who don't eat like me, look like me, pray like me? And then you've got income inequality or opportunity. How is this America if my kid may not do better than I did for the first time in the history of America? Societal and cultural change, particularly stuff around gender, makes some folks uncomfortable. Another pandemic, that monkeypox or mpox, or whatever they're calling it now, they just said that that is a potential outbreak. And then just the general level of uncertainty. We've been waiting for a recession now for 3 years. Like, where is this all going? Is inflation coming down? Is it going back up? Are we going to have higher levels of unemployment? So if you look at these things correctly, what do you do? I think first and foremost is you listen to try to understand your people. Think like Joe. He's curious about everybody. That's the way you need to be about your people. When you listen to people, you give them the dignity. You give them the respect of valuing who they are in the world. Next up is reiterate their shared purpose. You guys have outstanding values. Being part of that is being part of something bigger than yourself. When you have that, you've started to build some trust because you've given some dignity, you have some shared purpose, and when you have trust, you can focus on whatever the change is you're trying to do. But I think we've been really upside down on this by not acknowledging